He wasn't born in a convent, nor into a family of saints. He wasn't surrounded by incense or Gregorian chants. Instead, he came into the world in the ordinary hum of a city, where people rushed past each other, where screens flickered day and night, and where faith often got buried beneath noise. His name was Carlo Acutis, a boy with brown eyes, a gentle smile, and an inner clarity that felt out of place in a generation lost in distractions. From a very young age, something in him stirred differently. While other children clung to cartoons and superheroes, Carlo's heart clung to something invisible but real, a presence, a quiet whisper that spoke to his soul when everything else went silent. He would later call it by name, Jesus, not in a rigid, distant way, but as a friend, as someone closer to him than even his own breath. Carlo was born on May 3rd, 1991, in London, into a family that, like many others, did not place faith at the center of their lives. His parents believed, but more as a tradition than a flame. It was the child, not the parents, who would awaken that flame again. As a toddler, Carlo would stop to gaze at churches during walks, his eyes lingering with curiosity and awe. He asked questions that no one expected. Why did Jesus suffer for us? Where does the soul go after we die? His mother, Antonia, once said that he would ask about heaven with such intensity that it didn't feel like imagination. It felt like memory. When the family moved to Milan, his spiritual journey truly began to bloom. It wasn't forced, it wasn't staged. He simply lived it. Carlo began asking to attend Mass even before he was of age. He wanted to sit quietly in the pews. He wanted to see the host. By the age of 7, he received his first communion, and that moment became the center of his life. He called the Eucharist my highway to heaven, and with that, everything else began to make sense. He wasn't trying to be special. He didn't act superior. He played soccer with friends, laughed at silly jokes, loved animals, and explored computer coding with fascination. But there was something in the way he loved that made him different. When he greeted people, he looked into their eyes. When he prayed, he did it with his whole being. He carried inside him an invisible anchor, something that held him steady even when the world spun fast. Carlo didn't wear holiness like a medal. It was sewn into his daily life, into how he treated the janitor at school, how he helped classmates with homework, how he never mocked anyone even when others did. He was drawn to those who were left out, ignored or forgotten. He would buy sleeping bags for the homeless. He would sit beside someone eating alone in the cafeteria, and he did it without fanfare, because for him it wasn't charity. It was love. It was normal. The ordinary things became sacred when Carlo touched them. Even the hum of a computer screen became a tool for evangelization. He would spend hours designing websites that told stories of Eucharistic miracles, real, documented signs of Jesus' presence in the Blessed Sacrament throughout history. He wasn't trying to become a tech genius or impress anyone. He just wanted others to know what he knew, that Jesus is real, that he is here, and that he is waiting for each soul, in silence, in love. And the more Carlo discovered this truth, the more he glowed. There was something luminous in his presence, something that teachers, priests, and even strangers noticed. A quiet joy, a stillness in his gaze, a confidence not in himself, but in God. He once said, "Being close to Jesus is my life plan." And that plan was not complex. It was built on small acts of devotion, done consistently with love. He prayed the rosary every day. He attended Mass daily whenever he could. He went to confession weekly, not out of fear, but because he wanted his soul to be clear, like a mirror reflecting Christ. He adored the Blessed Sacrament in silence, simply sitting, sometimes for an hour, sometimes more, as if keeping company with a friend who never leaves. And when people asked why he was so drawn to the Eucharist, he would smile and say, because that's where Jesus is. But perhaps the most powerful thing about Carlo was this. He didn't think he was doing anything extraordinary. In fact, he believed that everyone could live this way. "We're all born as originals," he once said, "but many die as photocopies." It wasn't a criticism, it was an invitation to be fully yourself, but with Christ at the center. To not be afraid of being different if that difference brought you closer to heaven. And so, even as the world around him chased trends, Carlo walked a quieter, brighter path. Not louder, not bolder, just deeper. And that depth, that stillness, would become the very foundation of something far greater than he could have imagined. Because love, when lived in truth, doesn't stay small. It multiplies. It spreads. And the light that Carlo carried was only beginning to shine. If this story has touched your heart even a little, we invite you to be part of this journey with us. Like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your presence helps us grow our faith-filled community. And if you feel inspired, share your name and the city you're watching from in the comments below. We'd love to greet you in our next video with a blessing just for you. Carlo's life wasn't marked by thunder or lightning. There were no clouds parting, no celestial voices echoing through his bedroom. His holiness grew in silence, like sunlight rising through the cracks of ordinary days. But beneath that still surface, there was a burning fire, a love so fierce and focused that it transformed everything he touched. That love had a name, the Eucharist. To many, the Eucharist is a tradition, a moment on Sunday, a symbol. To Carlo, it was alive. It was Jesus, and it changed everything. From the moment he first received the Blessed Sacrament, Carlo knew, not with his mind, but with his soul, that he was holding God, not an idea of God, not a reminder, the real, living Christ. This was not a belief he inherited from others. It wasn't something he simply repeated from catechism class. Carlo felt it in the depths of his being. It filled him with awe. And more than that, it made him want to respond, not with grand speeches, but with reverence, silence, and devotion. He wanted to be close to the tabernacle. He wanted to kneel before the altar. He wanted to rest in the presence of his beloved. He began attending daily Mass, not out of obligation, but out of love. Each Mass was like oxygen to him. It kept him alive in ways no one could fully understand. And when he couldn't be physically near the Blessed Sacrament, he would turn his heart toward it, praying spiritual communions, offering every moment to Jesus, even his studies, even his struggles. His relationship with Christ was not part of his life, it was his life. One of his favorite practices was Eucharistic adoration. Carlo could sit for hours in front of the monstrance, not saying a word, just gazing, heart to heart. People often misunderstand adoration, thinking it must be filled with thoughts or words. But Carlo understood its essence, to be still, to let the soul breathe in the presence of love. "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven," he would say. And it wasn't poetry to him. It was direction. It was truth. He began reading about Eucharistic miracles, historical moments where the veil between heaven and earth had been momentarily lifted, where hosts bled, where bread turned into flesh, where science stumbled and faith soared. These stories captivated him, not because they were sensational, but because they confirmed what he already knew deep inside, that the mystery of the Eucharist was real. But Carlo wasn't content with keeping this joy to himself. His heart burned to share it. He believed that if others saw what he saw, if they felt what he felt, the church would be full again. Hearts would awaken, souls would run toward Christ. So he did something that few teenagers would even think of. He built a website, a catalog of Eucharistic miracles, designed and coded with care, joy, and precision. It wasn't flashy, it was faithful. Each page told a story. Each image pointed to heaven. This wasn't just a hobby. it became a mission. He spent his afternoons researching church-approved miracles, organizing the information, choosing fonts and colors, making it accessible to the world. His fingers danced across the keyboard, but his soul was always fixed on Christ. And slowly, that website began to travel, from local parishes to international exhibitions, from small churches to massive youth gatherings. Thousands, eventually millions, began to encounter Jesus through the lens Carlo had built. It's hard to explain the power of what he created. It wasn't the design, it wasn't the programming, it was the spirit behind it. People could feel it, that silent burning love, that call to return, that reminder that God is not far. He is as close as the nearest tabernacle. But even with this growing influence, Carlo remained grounded. He didn't boast. He didn't see himself as a prophet or a genius. He was just a boy who loved Jesus. And that was enough. At school, his classmates began to notice, not because he preached, but because he lived differently. He listened more. He smiled often. He treated everyone with the same kindness, whether popular or ignored. And slowly, something began to shift. Friends who never thought about God began to ask questions. Some joined him at Mass, others started praying again. A few went to confession for the first time in years. It wasn't magic. It was grace, moving through the quiet witness of a teenager who had made space for God. Carlo once wrote, "The more we receive the Eucharist, the more we will become like Jesus." It wasn't just a theory. It was a promise he lived out every day. There's something incredibly beautiful about a soul so in love with God that it becomes transparent. You look at them and you see beyond them. You see something eternal. With Carlo, that's what happened. People didn't see fame or ambition. They saw light, a light that didn't flicker with mood or popularity, a light that came from a deeper source, one that would soon be tested in ways no one expected. Carlo Acutis was 15 when the first symptoms began. A persistent tiredness, bruises that lingered longer than they should, a quiet fatigue creeping into his vibrant steps. For a boy who lived life with such energy and light, the shift was almost imperceptible, until it wasn't. The diagnosis came suddenly, slicing through the comfort of his ordinary days. Acute promyelocytic leukemia, aggressive, rare, fast. The words fell into the world of his family like stones in still water, sending ripples of fear, confusion, and helplessness. For most, this would have been the beginning of a nightmare, a descent into despair, a reason to question, to rage, to cry out, "Why me?" But Carlo didn't react like most. He received the news with a silence that was not numbness, but surrender, a soft, sacred acceptance that stunned those around him, not a resignation to death, but an offering of life. As it was, with all its beauty, its pain, and its mystery. "I offer all my suffering to the Lord," he said, with eyes that had already seen farther than most ever will, "for the Pope, for the Church, and for those who suffer." It wasn't bravado. It wasn't denial. It was love laid down in the deepest, most complete way a soul can offer. From that moment on, every day became more precious. Each breath, a prayer. Each moment, a window into the eternal. Carlo's body weakened, his energy faded, but his spirit only grew stronger. In the hospital, hooked to IVs, surrounded by beeping machines and the sterile whiteness of clinical walls, Carlo radiated something untouched by illness: peace. The nurses noticed it first: his smile, his gentleness, how he thanked them even when the treatments hurt, how he encouraged other patients even as his own pain deepened. "There's someone else suffering more than me," he would say, as if his soul had already detached from the heaviness of flesh and anchored itself in something higher. He never asked for pity. He never cursed his illness. Instead, he carried it as a cross, not out of obligation, but out of love. Sadness is looking at yourself. he told someone once. Happiness is looking toward God. There were moments, of course, when the shadow crept in, times when the pain became sharp, when the weariness pressed heavy on his chest. But even then, he didn't close himself off. He reached deeper into his relationship with Christ, speaking to him, resting in him, uniting every tear to the tears once shed in Gethsemane. In the quiet of his hospital room, surrounded by machines and monitors, a boy was being transformed into something eternal. And those around him felt it. Family, doctors, friends. His mother later said, "There was something sacred in that room. We all felt it. We were afraid, but also at peace." He brought the Eucharist into that sterile space. He continued to receive it with trembling hands and a grateful heart. It was his lifeline, his strength, his joy. When his lips were too weak to speak, his eyes still shone with that familiar light, the one that never wavered even as the body gave way. His classmates came to visit. Some couldn't hold back tears. They had seen him play soccer, laugh at silly jokes, design websites with passion. And now here he was, frail, still, yet more alive than ever. "Don't worry," he told them softly. "I'm going to give you signs from heaven." He wasn't afraid. And that's what shook everyone most. This boy, barely out of childhood, facing one of the most brutal diseases known to man, was not afraid. Because he knew where he was going. He didn't cling to life because he had already given it away, long before the illness came. His life had already been poured out quietly every day, in every mass, every act of kindness, every whispered prayer. His journey was not ending. It was ascending. And on October 12, 2006, just days after he had offered everything for others, Carlo closed his eyes on this earth and opened them in the light of eternity. There were no grand ceremonies in that moment, no thunder, no trumpet, just peace, a gentle stillness, as if heaven had opened its arms and received a friend. But what came after would prove that love, true love, never ends. If Carlo's story is awakening something deep within you, we invite you to journey with us. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're building a space where hearts like yours can find peace, truth, and connection. And we'd love to know where you're joining us from. Leave your name and city in the comments so we can pray for you and greet you with joy in the next video. The days after Carlo's death were quiet, but not empty. His family, though wrapped in sorrow, couldn't ignore the strange, overwhelming peace that had settled over them like a gentle mist. It was as if the heavens had whispered, "He is with us." And those who had known him, teachers, friends, even strangers who had only heard fragments of his story, began to speak of a sense of presence that hadn't left, but deepened. At his funeral, held just days after his passing, there were tears, of course. He was only 15, so young, so full of life. And yet, as people gathered around his casket, as prayers were whispered through trembling voices, there was something sacred in the air. The sadness didn't suffocate. The grief didn't feel hopeless. Instead, it felt like a threshold, a doorway. Carlo had always said, "We're born as originals, but many die as photocopies." But he hadn't. He had lived as an original, bright, unique, unforgettable. And in his death, that light began to scatter like seeds on the wind, falling quietly into hearts all over the world. His mother, Antonia, grieving but filled with a mother's faith, couldn't ignore the stirrings of something greater beginning to unfold. It started with a simple gesture. As people visited Carlo's tomb in Assisi, nestled in the land of St. Francis, surrounded by white, pink and red roses, she began to collect the petals that had fallen around the stone. There was something symbolic about them, fragile yet beautiful, delicate like the life of her son, but radiant with love. She began giving them to those who were suffering, to families in mourning, to children in hospitals, to the forgotten and the broken-hearted, not as magic, but as tokens of prayer, of remembrance, of hope. Then something unexpected happened. One of those petals made its way to Brazil, to a region in the state of Pará, a small act of love carried across oceans. And in that distant land, something miraculous began to unfold. The petal did not wither. Days passed, weeks. Still, it retained its shape, its color, its softness. It seemed untouched by time. Even under a microscope, scientists observed something extraordinary. The cells were still alive, not frozen, not preserved, alive. Moisture still present. The petal even adjusted to its environment, softening the surface beneath it as if it had been freshly plucked that same morning. Under normal conditions, a rose petal, once separated from its stem, begins to dry in days. In 2 weeks it curls and dies, but not this one. It defied every rule. Doctors, biologists, chemists, none could explain it. No chemicals, no preservatives, no logical answers. But for those who received it, none of that mattered. The miracle wasn't in the biology, it was in the timing, in the love, in the way hearts opened when they touched it, when they prayed, when they felt deep inside that Carlo was not gone, and that was only the beginning. Testimonies began to emerge from Italy, from India, from America. Healings, conversions, moments of unexplainable peace. People who hadn't prayed in decades suddenly fell to their knees. Families began attending Mass together again. Teenagers asked to go to adoration. A small light was spreading, gentle but steady, and it carried his name. Carlo. The Vatican took notice. His cause for beatification, already under review, began gaining momentum. The Church, cautious and deliberate in such matters, opened its eyes to the growing body of evidence, not just the physical healings, but the spiritual ones, the way his story touched so many across generations, languages, and cultures. He was no longer just a young boy who had loved Jesus. He was becoming a voice for the digital age, a light in a world too often dimmed by screens and silence. And then came the Eucharistic exhibitions. His website, once a humble teenage project, was now being displayed in churches, schools, and cathedrals around the globe. Panels filled with photographs, testimonies, and miracles documented throughout centuries. And behind each display, the spirit of a boy who believed that if people truly knew, their lives would change. And they were. Visitors came in wheelchairs, children came with questions. Skeptics came with arms crossed and left with eyes full of tears, because something in Carlo's story broke through the noise. He wasn't from a distant century. He didn't wear sandals and robes. He wore jeans and sneakers. He played PlayStation. He loved coding. And yet he had lived a life so deeply rooted in the eternal that now even heaven seemed closer through him. In Assisi, his tomb became a pilgrimage site, not just a place of memory, but of encounter. There, people prayed with trembling lips, lit candles, left photos, letters, rosaries. Some stayed hours, others only minutes, but most left changed. And from this sacred place, something extraordinary began, a live stream. A 24-hour video feed of Carlo's resting place, broadcast to the world through Maria Vision Italia. People watching from their homes, hospitals, prayer groups. Alone in the silence of their rooms, they typed into the chat, "Carlo, please heal my daughter. Help my son find his way. Thank you for bringing me back to Jesus." Each message, a cry, a hope, a spark. And somehow it felt like Carlo was still listening, still helping, still smiling with that quiet joy that once lit up hospital rooms and school hallways. But what happened next would confirm, not only for the Church, but for the world, that Carlo Acutis was not just a memory. He was a sign, and signs always point somewhere greater. Years have passed since Carlo Acutis left this earth, and yet the warmth of his presence seems only to grow. His life, once lived quietly between classrooms, soccer fields and chapels, now echoes across continents, not with noise, but with grace. Because Carlo never sought to be remembered. He simply sought to love, and that kind of love never disappears. In October of 2020, in the heart of Assisi, the church raised his name to the altars. A boy, a teenager, a digital missionary, now declared blessed. The ceremony was breathtaking, but not extravagant. As the proclamation was made, people wept, not just because a new blessed had been named, but because the church had recognized in Carlo something they had felt all along, that God had used this ordinary soul to reveal an extraordinary truth. For beatification, the church requires a miracle, a medically unexplainable healing attributed to the person's intercession. Carlo's miracle came from Brazil, where a little boy with a rare pancreatic disease was suddenly, completely and permanently healed after his family prayed to Carlo. The doctors were speechless. The church, thorough in its investigation, confirmed the truth. But the real miracle wasn't just in that one healing. It was in the thousands of lives that began to change. Families rediscovered prayer, youth returned to the Eucharist, parishes created digital missions in his name. Children chose Carlo as their confirmation name. Priests found renewed joy. Skeptics felt a soft whisper in their hearts again. Something was awakening. Even now, more miracles are being investigated. The church has officially recognized a second one, and with that, the road to sainthood moves forward. Carlo Acutis may soon become the first canonized saint of the digital age, a saint in jeans, with a backpack and a laptop, who loved Jesus with a sincerity that broke through every screen and every heart. But beyond the titles and recognition, what remains is his invitation. An invitation not to admire, but to imitate. Not to put him on a pedestal, but to walk with him toward Christ. To embrace holiness not as something distant, but as something possible. Now, Carlo's life reminds us that we don't have to wait, that we don't need to be perfect, that we don't need robes, pulpits, or visions. We just need love. A love that shows up every day, in silence, in sacrifice, in simplicity. He showed us that even a teenager, surrounded by noise, pulled by temptation, immersed in technology, can live a life that glorifies God. He proved that the Eucharist is not just a tradition, but a lifeline. He demonstrated that suffering can become offering, that death is not the end, that heaven is real. And now his voice, soft, kind, honest, continues to speak. It speaks to you, yes, you, wherever you are, whatever your past, whatever weight you carry. You are not too far. You are not too broken. You are not too late. Holiness is calling. God is near. The Eucharist waits for you. So take one step. And Carlo, he'll be walking beside you, smiling, praying, whispering, "Don't be afraid. God is with you." If this story touched your heart and lit a flame of faith within you, don't let it go out. Like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're building something beautiful, and you are already a part of this sacred family. Comment below with your first name and city. We'll bless you by name in our next video as we grow together in light and grace. And now, if you're ready for something truly powerful, something that could reveal God's will for your life, click the video that's appearing on your screen. It's not just another video. It's a moment waiting to touch your soul. Thank you for walking with us. Amen.